Hi, I'm Anne, and I'm going to lead you through a nice slow yin practice today. We're going to be focusing on the hips areas. So you'll see through the practice I'm using some yoga blocks, some bricks and a blanket. So if you've got those, then go and grab them. If not, then cushions or little stacks of books would work really well as well. Anything that you can use to support the body and help you relax. So we're starting today's practice seated. I'm sat cross-legged. I've got my hips lifted up a little bit. If cross-legged doesn't suit you, then you can kneel, and if you don't fancy sitting up, then you can lie as well. The main thing is that you can be very relaxed, very calm. We're starting to turn our awareness inward. Tune into our body. It's called this raw material, finding out what it is we're working with today. So bringing your awareness right down into the body, to the place where you're resting against the floor. So that physical feeling of pressure, of contact. You might notice the temperature of the surface that you're against. And starting to notice the movements of the breath. So wherever it's easiest for you to feel the breath, so it might be the belly, the ribs, it might be up at the head. Noticing whether it's a fast breath, a slow breath. And one isn't better than the other. We're just noticing what's happening today. Sinking down into the body. Letting yourself slow down. Settling into this moment. And a slightly deeper inhale now to prepare us for movement. Opening your eyes, coming up to sit if you're lying. So the first pose that we're going to head into is butterfly pose. So that's soles of the feet together, a little distance away from the bottom. You might find it useful to lift the hips on something, helps us to get the pelvis to tip forward. You might also find it useful to use a couple of bricks, maybe tuck them underneath the thighs if the knees or hips find this pose better with support. And we're folding forward. Might lightly rest the hands onto the feet. Might also find it useful to support the head. So you can rest the elbows down, use the hands maybe against the forehead. So the first few moments of any pose are always the most interesting as we find out how the body is reacting today. As much as we can, dropping any expectations, any requirements from the body. Rather seeing what is happening with interest, a little inquisitive. If we expect the body to look or feel a certain way in these poses, setting up a distance between you and your body. And here we're trying to grow closer to our bodies, more intimate with our bodies. Moving away from the head controlling our activities. Letting the body decide. Making any adjustments as the body lets it be known they're needed. The body doesn't consider whether these are nice looking poses. The body just is. Pure, simple. About a minute more. So coming to the end of the pose, gently lifting yourself up. Use as much support from your arms to lift the torso up. You might need to use hands underneath the knees to lift those together. And moving into your counter pose, so it might just feel good to reach the legs out, maybe give them a little shake. Bring the hands behind you, bring the feet to the floor and windscreen wipe the knees one way, then the other. Gently feeling through, letting the body reset, readjust after this pose. You might even want to bring the soles of the feet to the floor, hands behind, and lifting the bottom high into tabletop. A bit more of an active counter pose if you're in the mood for that. So this next pose, very often we benefit from lifting the hips a little bit. I've got a yoga block underneath there. So wrapping your left leg underneath the right one, tucking the heel alongside the hip, and the right leg comes over the top, the knee pointed up towards the ceiling. If this feels too much, remember you can extend the lower leg, that left leg straight out in front. Both work nicely. So however you've decided to arrange your hips, we're turning around towards the right-hand side. You can hook the knee with the elbow. If it's too far away, then you might reach with the hand instead. So if you notice any areas of tension in the body, see if it feels okay to relax them. And then see if you can find the urge behind the tension. Maybe there's a thought process, an emotional process, just a need to have that tension there, and see if you can relax that urge behind it. Some tensions are protecting us, maybe physically, maybe psychologically. So if you need to keep any of that tension there, then that's a sensible thing to do. Another minute here. So gently untwisting the body, keeping the legs as they are for now. So you can keep the legs like this, or if your hips have a little bit more mobility, then start to wiggle that right leg, the right foot, further around to the hip. I want you to shift the weight in the legs a little bit to settle the hips. You can use a rolled up blanket to support the upper knee if it feels a little vulnerable there. And if you're working with the version with the lower leg straight out in front, then the same action works here. Wriggling the right leg further around. And if your hips want a little bit more intensity, then we can add a forward fold. You might need to use bricks like I am here to lift the floor up towards you. See how this feels. Don't need to do anything that feels too much. So the way our minds work, they tend to divide the world up into things that are good, bad, maybe things that are better or not as good as, maybe undeserving or deserving. But this isn't the time for that kind of understanding. In Yin, in this practice today, we're looking to just accept what is happening now. a minute longer if you like. You can always come out of things earlier. And gently start to ease your way out of this pose. As always, use as much support with the hands as you need. Sometimes it's easiest to take the hands behind you, lean back a little bit, and it makes it easier to free the legs up. You might go for the windscreen wipe of the knees, lowering them gently one way, then the other. You don't need to move in this space between the poses. You can just come to a still, neutral position. And again, if you're a fan of doing something more active, then that tabletop pose, hands and feet against the floor, lifting the hips, might feel good. So we're heading into a dragon pose next, also known as a lunge pose. So being able to lift the hands up on something is useful here. I've used yoga bricks. You can use a little stack of books, or a dining chair with one elbow on the seat works well. So you'll want to have something, maybe a blanket folded up underneath that back knee, or you can use a little lift and have it running across the front of the shin so that the kneecap is completely off the front end of it. And we'll want to have the right leg forward and the left leg back for this one. So letting the hips settle forwards to a comfortable, sustainable level of stretch. Getting that Goldilocks point. Not too much, not too little. So the Book of Eight is one of the oldest Buddhist texts. And in there are some instructions to what monastics could do. And this is a little section from that. Nor would they think of themselves inferior or superior to others. And they shouldn't take themselves as equal. So I find that last sentence the most intriguing. First bit's okay. You are not inferior than others, not superior to others. Okay, I'm equal. And then they take that away. Well, we shouldn't take themselves as equal either. So our minds tend to divide the world up into categories. But the Buddha's saying that monastics shouldn't really be using these categories, shouldn't be relying on them in that way. Coming to see the world just as is. Another minute available. Nothing is compulsory. Just starting to ease out, taking the hips back. You might turn this into a forward fold, bringing the hands to the floor, the belly to the thigh. Don't worry about whether that front knee is bent or straight. Just feeling the effect. And then you might bring both knees down to the floor and come into maybe a cat-cow stretch, arching the spine to the ceiling, and then reversing that, belly to the floor. And if you like doing a little more active poses between, then a downward dog might feel good. Again, lengthening through the spine, walking one leg, other leg. And starting to set up that whole sequence on the opposite side. So maybe lifting the hips a little bit. And threading the right leg underneath, bringing the left leg on top. Remember, you can do the version with that right leg extended instead, if that feels better on the knees or the hips. And then turning around towards the left side this time. So again, you might support the knee with the elbow or the hand if that's easier. You might find that the body softens, eases or opens up as you practice. If it does this, you might choose to go further into the pose. You might choose not to. You might choose to just enjoy being where you are. Aware of body, aware of breath. Another minute here. So gently untwisting out of this pose, keeping the legs as they are for the moment. So wiggling that top foot further round. It might get as far around as the hip, but don't worry if it doesn't reach that far. And this lift and settling of the hip bones might just get everything to fit better. And a rolled up blanket between the upper and lower knees might be a nice level of support. So we're adding in a bit of a forward fold, maybe. And don't be surprised if this feels very different on this side compared to the other. Might need to use different level of props, or just not fold forward at all. The more we get into the habit of seeing things as they are, the less stressful our experience tends to be. It lets us feel more connected to others, more connected to ourselves. Another minute available, optional. So gently easing your way out, using as much support from the hands as is needed. A lean back might make it easier to untangle the legs. It generally just feels really good to stretch those legs out. Maybe give a little wriggle around. And my favourite counter pose, the windscreen wipe of the knees one way, then the other. And lift the heart as you go, getting a bit of opening across the front of the chest. More active option here, the tabletop. Feet and hands down, lifting the hips high. If you need longer between sides, remember, you can pause the video whenever you like. But if you're ready, setting up for a dragon pose on the opposite leg. So getting whatever support you are using for the hands at the front, that extra level of padding or lift underneath the back calf. Is the right leg back this time, left leg forward. Starting to sink the hips down. Take as much weight as you need through the hands here. That's where you can control the intensity of this pose. If you're finding your breathing is becoming tense, or maybe your mind is wandering a lot more in this pose, it might be because the intensity is too much. The feelings are too harsh. Might need to back out a little bit. It's okay to be kind to yourself. We're using these shapes to explore what the body feels like, not to inflict an idea of what it should be like. Another minute here. Gently easing out. Use the strength in your arms to help. And if it feels good, turning into that forward fold, and belly towards the front thigh. Keep that front knee quite bent. Then bringing both knees down to the floor, both hands down to the floor. A gentle cat-cow if that feels nice. Spine towards the sky and belly towards the floor. Be alternating between those two. Your more active option here, maybe a plank or a downward dog. A nice way to lengthen through the spine, lengthen through the backs of the legs. And the final pose that we're going to work with today is well, you've got a choice. It's either a Sphinx pose or a seal pose. In both cases, it might feel better to have a little extra padding underneath the hips. Depends on what surface you're practicing on. So Sphinx pose. That'll be elbows onto the mat, arms reaching away. If that's too intense, then you can shuffle the elbows further forwards, reducing the curve in the spine. If you want a little bit more intensity, then you can bring blocks or your books underneath the elbows to put more curve in the spine. And you might go with seal pose, so that will be hands down onto the floor, straightening up through the arm. So finding the level of intensity that's going to work today. Remember, you can always shift between the options as you feel. An option to play with here is to let the head come forwards, stretching gently through the back of the neck, the upper shoulders. That might not be so pleasant to do for long periods of time, so again you can shift out of that when it feels best too. So the Buddha most frequently described himself with a word that, well, it translates as the one who is the, or the one who is thus come. So he doesn't give himself a title, doesn't see himself as being better, worse, or equal. He's just thus. Can you become the one who is thus? Just simply being here, feeling what you're feeling. Sensations, sounds, tastes, smells, thoughts, all allowed to be. Nothing in your experience needs to be excluded. Everything is given its space. Present with what is. Soft and accepting. Another minute. Gently starting to ease out of the pose. Coming down into crocodile. So that walks the elbows apart, the head rests on the back of the hands. When you're ready for a little more movement, then you can maybe rock the hips. Maybe you bend the knees and windscreen wiper those from side to side. And there's lots of options for different movements after this pose. So you might come up onto hands and knees. A gentle, really small cat-cow movement here. And arching the spine to the ceiling, lowering belly to the floor. Moving into pose of a child might feel nice. Hips to heels, maybe the hands underneath the forehead. Sometimes twisting through the spine is nice after a back bend, so turning to the right and the left. And we're heading into our relaxation next. So you might be lying on your back for that. Not always comfortable to lie on the back, so feel free to come to sitting if you'd rather. If you are lying on your back, then you might have soles of the feet on the floor, knees resting against each other. If it's comfortable, you might even stretch the legs out long. So settling in, resting down. Nothing to do. Noticing the breath. Noticing the body. bringing in small movements, maybe fingers, toes. And little bigger movements, whatever feels good. And draw the knees in towards the chest, wrap the hands around, maybe a little rock side to side. And gently rolling over onto your favourite side. Might support the head with the hands. And when you're feeling ready, lifting your way back up to sit. I thank you very much for your practice today. I hope your hips are feeling a little better. Namaste.